They're just stuff people are saying naturally rather than full-on interviews. Now I think there's one snippet that's taken out of an interview, but I use it to build a rhythm, and then there's a shot of the plane taking off, and we're into the report then. So it's kind of a bum, 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 and away we go.
Up a fair bit, John.
It may look like flying as we know it, but without a very important component.
There's no engine.
However, we're told it's completely safe.
We carry parachutes, yeah.
A 4x4 Jeep and 600 metres of cable play a vital role.
This is going to launch us.
So begins a day of gliding over the Kerry Mountains.
We've been coming to Inch now for, I think, more than 40 years. And there's that challenge of being able to use the up currents of the air, be they either thermals or down here in Kerry where we have the wind blowing on the ridge. We use that up current to stay up in the air. And that's a wonderful challenge. And to succeed at that gives you a tremendous reward.
We're heading towards the ridge, and I know the wind is coming at about 90 degrees
That's
to us, and edging in as close as I can to the ridge, always keeping an eye on our drift, and I'm looking around for other gliders at the same time because we're all trying to do the same thing.
At the moment we're flying at just over 1,500 feet, and we could potentially climb to 7,500 feet before air traffic control restrictions kick in. And the views here are just magnificent.
Given the right conditions, the gliders can spend more than 5 hours on a single flight, exploring the vastness of the Kerry Mountains.
And unless somebody talks to you on the radio, there's no noise and no distractions, and you can just commune with nature.
Down below, tourists on the beach are in awe.
It's spectacular. I think it's lovely. If I was younger, I might even have a go, I think.
I envy the people that do it because I'm petrified of heights.
The annual excursion to Inch Strand is the highlight for many in the Dublin Gliding Club, and while it may look daunting, for those involved, the concept is very simple.
It's simply flying without an engine.
Seán tSithigh, RTE News, Inch, County Kerry.
Okay, very simple story. It's, in terms of news, it's not really a news story, but it's engaging because I suppose the activity is interesting and the people are quite interesting as well. So when I was constructing it, you wanted to kind of give it a bit of a punch at the top, so by doing kind of a quick edit, by using kind of quick snippets of interview interspersed with the natural sound of the equipment being put in place and that, and your own script, it kind of helps to give it a bit of punch at the top. And I think you also get to know the participants because you're relying on them, because it isn't a very factual news story where you're trying to get a lot of information across. You're relying on the people involved. So in order to create the connection between the viewer and the main characters, you need to introduce them at the very top. And I think that's really important with a human interest story. The last thing you want to do is be the journalist who has 5-6 lines of script over wallpaper shots telling you what's happening. You need to get the rhythm and the movement into the piece right from the top.
Can I just ask you something about that, Seán?
Yeah.
When she was up talking to you in the gliding, were you with her then, or was she just talking to your iPhone?
Yeah.
Were you with her in that?
The way I filmed that, it was a 2-seater plane, and you're strapped in. And the reason I couldn't bring the camera in because the hood comes right down just over your head. It's literally there. So I didn't have room, and you're strapped in. So I used the phone. I obviously did my own piece to camera as a selfie. So I won't use the camera on the back of the phone is much better than the selfie one, so it's always worth your while just using that camera, even though you can't see yourself. You know from experience, you know whether you're in shot or not. And then for that interview, I simply interviewed her like that.
You held the camera like
I held the phone like that, used the mic off the camera. The sound wasn't great in that example, but it didn't matter in that situation. If anything, poor audio kind of adds to it in that kind of situation, because it's a more, I suppose, dramatic location than you would normally be filming in. So just simply filmed it like that. The alternative to doing that is you maybe take shots of your interviewee in the plane, and then once you hit the beach below, you do the interview standing up. You're immediately killing the interview. It's going to be a bland interview. She's going to be standing there, whereas the interview right in the middle of the action is always much more beneficial. I remember a few years ago, I did a report. Well, it's more than a few years ago now. It's 8 years ago. There was a waterfall on Cron Tuil, completely frozen over, and I carried the camera with me on the rucksack. I'd never climbed on ropes before with ice axes. There was 3 very experienced climbers with me, so they said they'd guide me through the whole thing. We spent 8 hours climbing, and I suppose I found it I really enjoyed it, but I found it a bit daunting, and I took all the interviews on the ground before we started the climb, just to have it in the can, so that I wouldn't have to do it on the ropes, and that I could concentrate on the ropes and minimise the amount of filming I'd have to do, because I had GoPros on 2 helmets, my own and one of the climbers. Now, it was a great report, but looking back in it, if I was doing that report again, I'd do it so differently. I'd do everything on the phone. I'd shoot all my interviews on the ropes. I'd shoot everything on the ropes. Quality would suffer image-wise and audio, but it wouldn't matter. The content would be 100% stronger because of it, because you're literally hanging off the edge, shooting it, and you're bringing the viewer right into that scene. So they're the kind.
Package. You don't have that.
I don't.
You showed us them the last time.
Yeah, I don't think I do.
It's very good. The one of you going up the.
Yeah, it's still a good package, but
Yeah.
you know, I'd shoot it very differently now.
Yeah, but and so you kind of learn as you go along.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, and the way you tell stories evolves. Initially, I suppose I was using a lot of tripod, an awful lot of tripod, because it's the way cameramen are trained, and rightly so. You get better, more consistent footage off the tripod. But in recent years, I seem to be doing a lot more handheld. The shooting is a lot freer, because I think it's important nowadays that we capture reality and actuality. I suppose traditionally TV making follows the kind of the BBC gold standard, set up your sequences, shoot a wide shot, get the person to do the same thing mid shot, get a tight shot of the hand going on the door as she opens it, and then in the edit you put it all together in one seamless movement. Now, with, I suppose, the adoption of new technologies, social media, and so on, we're all making our own films. Everyone's making a film. People know what an edit is, how it's made, why it's there. So when they see sequences, they know that has been done 3 times to get that lovely sequence. And for me, I think it's important now to try and capture as much actuality as possible. So I tend now to shoot my sequences in such a way. Let's say, someone's filling a glass of water. Traditionally, you'd have set up the tripod, tight shot of the hand going on the tap, tight shot of the water going into the tap, big wide shot of the whole kitchen, the woman standing there. Whereas now, what I'd be inclined to do is, where's my phone? I go handheld. I'll have them mic'd up if they're being interviewed. I'll have a radio mic, so that gives me the freedom to move the phone around, and I don't need to worry about the camera mic, because I'm getting 2 sources of audio. And I go from tight to my mid, which shows the person and the sink, into the water going into the tap. So in a single movement, I'm getting maybe 2 or 3 of the traditional sequencing shots, but it's all happening in a fluid movement. And as well as that, then I think people are a lot more natural. I'm doing a lot more interviews with people as they're doing stuff. So I'm miking them up rather than doing the traditional standalone interview where you're pulling someone off to the side. Right, we're doing the interview now. I'm going to mic you up. I'm checking my audio levels. And the person's getting more nervous by the minute as they're standing there waiting for this big interview, versus miking someone, tell the farm to start piking the silage to the sheep, and you start banging questions at him, and he's working away, and it's coming from him very naturally, and you're getting lovely images, lovely natural movement in the interview, along with the content of the verbal interaction. So there's just techniques that they're subtle, but they definitely, I think, enhance the telling of a story. This one, I think I used maybe Oh yeah, there's music in this, just it generates an atmosphere. It's a Christmas story.
Busy times on the Shukru farm just outside Tralee. Growing Christmas trees for over 20 years, producing handmade wreaths and ornaments, this is very much a family business.
Well, it's 100 hours a week at the moment, Seán.
Over 20,000 trees covering 8 acres requires careful crop management.
Flat out all morning, working on the wheels.
But Paddy Shukru has adopted a very unique approach this year.
In an effort to make the production is more environmentally friendly, I am starting to use geese as weed control. They keep the place clean, and obviously they fertilise themselves as well. It'll say fertilise in the long term, and it's certainly with why spraying. I don't like spraying for my own health, and I think for the health of the ground and the soil, it will make. It's in 2 or 3 years' time I think I'll really see the difference.
Mighty growers, the best investment we ever made. No more spraying ground, no more Roundup and let the geese in grazing.
At the moment, Paddy has 10 of these fellas working in the fields, but he has big plans to expand next year.
Hopefully we'll breed them next year, and that we will have maybe one for the Christmas dinner next year, or maybe in a few to sell next year, because I've a load of people inquiring as to whether I sell them a goose for Christmas or not, because again, they're total free range.
But the new business model has yet to be endorsed by the woman of the house.
It might be his plan, but it wouldn't be mine. I don't know. I suppose when you be used to them around the place, I just wouldn't think about eating them afterwards.
They'll survive another winter, but Paddy has every intention of literally killing 2 birds with the one stone next Christmas.
It's a fact if we can get out the fox, we're flying.
Bye. Seán tSithigh, RTE News, Farmers Bridge, County Kerry.
It's a very simple story, but the characters make it, the people make it. You know, you've got the old granddad or the father there, and the wife, the conflict, I suppose, in terms of business models between the wife and the husband. You can kind of play with the story, but all that has to be kind of generated in your own head. You have to kind of create the little narratives within this telling of the story, and you have to script it accordingly, so that you might have noticed my scripting was teeing up their lines. I wasn't giving the information they were about to give. Let them deliver the punchline. They're the main characters, not the reporter. Sometimes as reporters we can make mistakes thinking that we are the main attraction in the story. We're only the messenger, and you have a duty to give your participants the platform to be the lead role in your story.
That's a very important point, yeah. Because it's a mistake a lot of young journalists make starting off. They think they can tell everything.
Yeah.
But as you say, they're only the medium, and like it's far more effective. You can see it there with their own kind of accents and idioms. They add colour to it, don't they?
It is, and I know, like when I'm sitting down to write my script, if I see myself drifting into more than 2 sentences between each interview, I know I have to rewrite this. I'm getting too wordy here, and there's nothing worse than a wordy journalist. It gets very boring for the viewer.
You show rather than tell.
Exactly, you know, and you have to be conscious going out for your interviews what you want. So they're becoming your script writers. They're writing the script with you. So your questions quite often are geared and tailored for the content, for the specific follow-on from a line of script that you want. And your skill as an interviewer has to try and bring the interview into that area. Now, you also have a duty to allow people to say what they really want to get across. But in terms of storytelling, it's important that you're kind of very aware entering the interview that it would be nice to capture this or that, and you try and draw that out in the interview. Just the little subtleties that just make the difference in telling a story. It was an interesting story anyway. But if you imagine building a story like building a wall, you've got your different blocks. You've got your block of audio, you've got your block of interview, you've got your block of script, you've got your block of natural sound, you've got your block of creative storytelling techniques. The more blocks you can add into a single report, the stronger the wall and the stronger the report you'll build. You're not going to get all of them into every report, but you should strive to try and get as many as possible into each report. The same applies for print media. You know, all the most engaging stories are ones where you can see that the writer has put a bit of thought into how he actually opens the story, how he paces the story, and how he ends the story. It's really important to end with something strong. So any questions on any of that, or would you like to add anything to it, or any criticisms? We'd love to hear criticisms, because they're the things that stick with you. And
That's very interesting. I've learned a lot from it, Seán. I mean, just watching the way you work. This group now are doing a module in TV journalism, so you're going to have to do all this in a couple of weeks for Fergal in the TV module, in the news day. So are there any questions you have for Seán, like just to help you with it, or have you started doing the editing yet, or what stage are you at? Just started, have you?
what are you filming on? Is it phones or? Yeah.
It's all mobile phones, is it? Yeah.
Yeah. And you're editing on iPad, is it?
No, Mac Final Cut Pro.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah,
good.
we have the Final Cut Pro in the newsroom,
Okay.
so they use that, but they probably
Okay.
don't know, but what they
Yeah.
will have to do by the end of April is produce a 1 hour kind of news package
Yeah.
where they go out and do reports, and some of them will
Yeah.
be presenting, and the others, the last year's class did a really good one. It's up online. But do you want to kind of ask anything about just how you go about telling or even preparing for interviews, when you go out? Yes, Yash?
What's the biggest difficulty you faced while shooting on a phone?
Say that again?
What's the biggest difficulty?
The biggest difficulty, weather conditions, definitely. In the sense that, the screen. If it's raining, what I do if it's raining, I try and cover as many connections as I can with cling film or something like that. But at the end of the day, it's a touch screen system on your phone, and you're getting rain droplets on the screen, and you all know when rain gets on your screen, the tap doesn't work, and it just gets a bit frustrating. The second thing, the mics then, but the audio can be an issue, but I'm fortunate in that I can use my radio mics from my other camera kit. I've attachments that can kind of plug into that, so I've got kind of good wing mufflers and stuff for that. Another good tip, if you don't have a mic, what I've used in the past where I've just had my phone is, the headphones for your, imagine you're in a busy place, let's say you're in a train station and something has happened in the train station and you want to pick up a couple of interviews, all you have is your phone. Stick in your headphones and use the little microphone on your headphone as a mic, and that kills out an awful lot of surround sound. So you get really, really good quality, much better quality audio off an interview by simply using the headphones. Or if you're doing a kind of a piece to camera yourself, I generally maybe hang one earphone there so that I get the mic here, and that's the audio I'm taking for myself. So I'm knocking out all the distractive audio around me.
Yeah.
Do you know when you're going out to do some of your interviews for the packages and that, are there times where you have like a preconceived idea of how you want a package to look?
Yeah, that's a very good point now, because there's pros and cons to that. And I've learned the hard way. It's always important to have plan A. It just gives you a focus, and it's a safety net, and it takes, especially when you're working on your own to a deadline, it takes the pressure off you to a certain extent in knowing what you want and having an idea how you're going to structure it, and it makes things very easy then in the edit, because you're generally up against the clock and it's bang, 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 but you've the whole thing thought out in advance and you've shot accordingly. The danger is, of course, you miss a nugget. You miss something that's really, really nice because you were so focused and tunnel visioned in telling the story a certain way. And it's happened to me, I remember on one occasion, one of the early bulletins, there was a bulletin at 5 o'clock, I was doing a story about a pair of corn crates which had arrived in a field. It was the first time they'd had corn crates in 30 years in that area. And I had an interview with the farmer who owned the field. He was a great character. And I had the whole thing thought out in my head, what he was going to kind of roughly say and the whole lot. And he did thankfully say it in the interview, and I was delighted. And I edited the piece and I sent it up for the 5 o'clock. And you're working under pressure, so you're juggling a lot of things. it was when I was editing a piece for the Irish Language Bulletin, which was later. I was scrubbing through the material, and in the middle of the interview, I had asked him, what kind of sound does the concrete make? And I was expecting, a descriptive response, and he says, oh, go on, Marsha. And he had a great face, weathered face, and it was a close-up shot. And for some reason, it didn't click with me when I was initially editing that was pure gold, because I was too focused on how I wanted to construct it. Whereas for the second piece, I opened the entire package with that. So all you see, the first frame you see in the report is the farmer, a close-up, oh, Glorma, and making the noise, and you're straight away, what the hell is going on here? So straight away the viewer is hooked, and then tell the story after that. So you use it almost, not as bait, but just to capture the imagination. But that's an example of how having, I suppose, overly thought out the story in advance kind of shuts down other potential avenues on site. It can happen visually as well, where you're going out to a location, you might even be familiar with the location, and you're going to say, right, I'm going to shoot it this way, and I'm going to show that, and show him doing that there. You could arrive and there might be something else there that would make much better imagery, but because you're just so focused on how you wanted to shoot it initially, that's the way you shoot it, and you miss an opportunity. So I suppose the only advice I can give is that to have a rough plan, but just keep your eyes and ears open for other possibilities when you're there.
Very good. Yeah.
Would you shoot the package, every package, set it up on the same day, or would you have to shoot things over?
Generally, for many of my stories, the nature of my stories they're generally kind of feature stories, so there isn't a huge rush to have them in. So quite often the editors will give you can spend all day filming and editing the story and send it the following day, maybe do a bit more editing the following day. Some stories then, obviously they're breaking stories, they have to be in, so they're being shot and edited on the same day. So it's the nature of the story, and the constraints on the desk as well. They might be short-staffed on the day, they might really need something simply to fill the bulletin, So it varies,
Anyone else? Yes.
When you're
Holly?
saying about the importance of structuring your questions properly so that you get a good punchline or whatever, what kind of things do you mainly avoid to make sure that they say what you want them to say?
Yeah. It took me a while, because I didn't work in journalism before I started, before I joined RTE. My own background, I was a heritage officer with the Department of the Gaeltacht down in South Kerry. The bulk of the work was, a lot of it was research based, but I was working with community groups, organising festivals. I was doing a lot of collecting of folklore and that. But those skills were used then, and they've come in very handy in journalism, because essentially, you're trying to dig out material, you're interviewing people. But never ask someone to say something. Ever. Even if you really, really think it's going to make this picture and it's going to be lovely in the narrative, because it's going to come across forced. No matter how good an actor they are, it's going to come across forced. You need to keep asking the same question in different ways until you get what you need. And the other thing then as well is the way you ask the question. It's always best not to ask a specific question initially. Tell me about is a great one, I find, to use. So we'll say, you could go to your man, you'd say, how many Christmas trees have you, and when do you start growing trees? So he'll give you an answer to that question, but it's a closed question. You're closing down avenues immediately. Whereas if you come along and say, well, Paddy, tell me about the setup here. It's a very casual approach as well, because you want to get that relaxed feel of the interview. You don't want him feeling like he's being interrogated, and it gives him an open canvas to work with. So he'll give you the information in a very natural, I suppose, engaging way, rather than you. Now, if you need to focus in on specifics, and if you're working on a more controversial story, then of course you're going to start asking specifics. But I think that avenue of questioning as well opens other possibilities. Suddenly something else might be thrown into the mix. For example, the thing with the geese and Paddy's idea about killing the goose the following year and selling a goose and a tree to people. I didn't know about that. It came from him naturally in the interview, and it was in a big extended piece of talk by him that came out. You know, it was by accident. So it's always best, I think, to keep your questions as open-ended as possible and give the person freedom within the question.
Very good. The girl at the back there, do you want to ask a question? Yeah.
The second video about the New York subway, it was like pretty interesting and like original, the rhythm and visual thing. So my first question is if it was for the television or for which platform?
That was for their online output.
Yeah, because it reminds me more like the YouTube videos than like normal videos that you can see broadcast. And the second question is about that what do you think about the storytelling in television nowadays? Because we cannot see like that challenging videos, like those kind of things in as you say, like
on broadcast, yeah.
And they are like more traditional.
Yeah. Yeah, like if you look at my reports, they're quite traditional when you strip everything away. You know, 2-3 interviews, bit of script, piece to camera from the journalist. You know, quite traditional. It's interesting. It's interesting times. I always hate doing this, but it's an area of concern for the entire broadcast industry. How many people here regularly every evening sit down to watch the 6 o'clock news on RTE?
Yeah, put up your hands. I'd be interested. Here we have journalism students.
Yeah.
How many of you watch the news? Where do you get your news? Or do you look at the news?
How many of you get your news from your Twitter feeds? Facebook. Online sites, journal.ie. Yeah.
So online sites is a big one.
Yeah, so the nature of news consumption is changing, and I think in terms of broadcast media, it's the big challenge at the moment. There needs to be an evolution. It's difficult from the current perspective to see how one should evolve, because it's happening so rapidly, and technology is changing so quickly. For example, in RTE now there was a complete change in, I suppose, editorial approach, in that traditionally everything would be held back and hidden for the bulletin, and then it's revealed in the bulletin. The policy now is to get it out there as quickly as possible, as soon as you can verify it and present it in an attractive manner. Get it out there. It's digital first. Another example of how things have been evolving: journalists, video journalists and mobile journalists are now shooting their content. Okay, traditionally you wanted 16:9. Journalists are now framing their content, pushing their interviewees slightly to the centre, so that we can crop the edges off if necessary and allow people to watch it with the phone held vertically, because most people hold their phones like that when they're sucking in content. So if you had shot that interviewee traditionally, they'd have been positioned to the left or right or screen. If you had to splice them for that type of view, you've lost your interviewee. So there's a growing consciousness of the importance of creating content that can be adapted for multi-platforms, be it broadcast. So that the original footage could have been used on the TV because it's 16:9, but then when you crop it, cut the edges off, you still have the centerpiece that you need, and it can go out on your online content for your social media feeds, and you spread the story that way.
Very good. Anyone else? Yes, this girl over here.
2 questions. Do you use your iPhone every time? You go like...
No, I don't. I use both. I supplement. The reason I've before Christmas there was a week I used the iPhone all week. I have another camera. The reason I use the camera is because it's got the zoom. You know, I'm fortunate enough to have another piece of equipment that is slightly more advanced and quicker to use and easier to use. Now, I use the phone quite a bit for piece to cameras, especially if there's movement. Let's say I'm on a protest or on a parade, I'll use selfie on the phone, and I'll use that in my larger camera report. Or I was recently, there was a story I did on I have there an Equinox discovery where a megalithic tomb, a guy just made a connection between the equinox, the setting sun and the equinox, and a piece of rock art at the back of the tomb. I did a piece to camera inside in the tomb. I had to do with the phone, so I kind of use both together. Then I'll use the phone perhaps if someone's really nervous, if they're just one of these nervous interviewees, it's less intimidating to use the phone. And you'd be surprised, quite often, you know, you'd come away from a place and you'd have taken some footage on your phone for social media because it's just easier to knock it off onto the servers and that, and you're kind of comparing and you're saying, Jesus, the stuff on the phone is much nicer than what the camera managed to capture, you know. So once you've decent enough lighting conditions, the phones can capture some beautiful images as well, you know, and it's very flexible, you know. The other thing is weight. Do you know, if you're hiking up a mountain, are you going to carry your big tripod? Are you going to carry the big camera with its big batteries on your back? Or are you going to put the phone in your pocket and carry a small little bag like this and use maybe a rock? You plant this on the rock, the phone attached to it, and the rock becomes your tripod for your piece to camera, you know. Or you shoot a piece to camera like that. 2 years ago, there was in A Hope in Hell, the editors would accept it because it was seen as being amateurish. You know, a selfie piece to camera by a journalist, that's not on. It doesn't look official enough. But depending on the nature of the story, it can actually add the immediacy to the story. Remember the first one, the Croatian refugees, that push started, so I just swung the phone around and recorded a piece of camera as I was moving with them, and it just gives that bit of energy to the report. So I'd use both only because I've got another camera to work with as well. But as I say, there's no issue shooting. There's an app called Filmic Pro. I think it's about $8.99. Filmic Pro. FILMIC Pro, PRO. And it gives you manual control over exposure and focus. Because I suppose the drawback of using the cameras, as you all know, let's say there's a bright light in the background and you're trying to even take a photo of someone there, the exposure drops on their face because the phone is automatically exposing for the brightest light source. With this, you can manage the exposure manually and lock it, so that regardless what happens in the interview, a big white truck could pass in the background and your whole shot dips into black to expose for the truck. With this app, it maintains the focus and exposure on the subject you have selected. So it's a fantastic app, and it's essential really for using your phone for broadcast output, because it just gives that slicker, more consistent feel to it, rather than having exposure dipping up and down, which gives a kind of a more not amateur. There's nothing wrong with amateur footage, and it's funny. I was saying it to Mary earlier. Traditionally, journalists were putting stories out there. The public were consuming that following. Journalists are nowadays consuming stuff the public is posting online, and we're reacting to that rather than having community reacting to our stories. So the whole method of news sourcing has been flipped on its head. You know, in a sense, there's this huge growth in community journalism, and our duty then as reporters, I suppose, is to ensure, if we are going to use elements that we're finding on social media as components for our stories, our duty is to ensure that it's reliable material, that we can verify everything, that we can safely put this out and stand over it, and not become a laughingstock by posting something that never really happened, you know. So I suppose that's the big challenge at the moment. I suppose the industry's in a bit of turmoil, and it's just trying to, you know, different agencies, different organisations, different media platforms trying to find the best way of moving forward. So in a way, you're very fortunate that you're entering into that whole realm now. It's a very exciting time because it's the biggest revolution in media since we started telling stories, in a way. So you know, it has its challenges, and I suppose, you know, in terms of immediate employment and stuff, it's getting more difficult to get jobs. But you're coming into the whole industry at a very exciting time, and you have the opportunity to maybe carve out your own niche within that industry and maybe generate a completely new way of news telling that hasn't existed before.
That's very good. I think that's a good note to finish it on, Seán. Unless there's any more questions, is there? Oh, one. Okay, Laura.
Just what's like from your experience, what's the better way to like conduct the interview? Should you ask the interviewee to like repeat the question back, or do you mostly leave it on like voiceovers? Like say the story about the geese, you had left it as a voiceover to introduce what they were going to do with the geese next year. But like, would you generally ask them, can you repeat what I say?
No. I find if you start, and I have done that, because it's you think it's the right thing to do, but when you do that, I've noticed the first telling of anything is always going to be the best. And actually, a very good pointer is never discuss the topic in detail with the interviewee before you actually record the interview. You know in your head that this is the right person to talk about this subject. So what I often did it, and it's a huge mistake. You're on the phone and you're trying to get to know them as well, and you're trying to make them feel comfortable with you. So the natural thing is for you to talk about the story you're going to shoot together, so that when you come to the interview, that person has told you everything already. So the excitement of them telling you what they know is gone. They're repeating. And it's never as good. And there's also a risk then as well when you arrive on site and you're getting your gear together and you're trying to entertain the interviewee as well. And naturally you might drift to talking about the story, and they'll tell you the whole story. And then you're setting up the interview and you're asking them to tell you it again. And it's never as good as the first time. So try and avoid discussing too much detail in advance, and you'll get a better interview for it. And then, if, as you say, if you aren't happy with the response you've been given, ask the question again in a different way, but maybe put another question before it as well, something completely different, because people are intelligent, obviously, and they'll know that you're obviously unhappy with the response and you're asking the same question again, and it puts added pressure on them as well. So ask it in a different way, maybe one or two questions down the line again.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes. Yeah, Rebecca.
It's a simple question, but where do you discover most of your stories from? Do you keep an eye on like small local papers, or?
It varies. I suppose a lot of my stories, I like to do local angles on national stories. So let's say government policy, there's some element of policy announced. Let's say, for example, there was a story, a change in pesticide laws. It was an EU regulation, which meant that in order to purchase certain types of strong pesticides, you'd have to go off and do a FETAC course, level 5, to learn how to use these things properly and safely. Now, it so happened that I went through a list of the chemicals and pesticides that were falling under the category, and I discovered that one of them was this dietine, which was used to spray potatoes. So think about it in an Irish context. You've got the whole tradition of and our association with potatoes. You've got these small little farmers who plant their own crop for their own table, and they're having to go off to do a course and pay €350 to do the course, to be able to spray the stuff they've always been spraying. on the potatoes that they've always been growing, that their fathers and grandfathers have been growing. So that's an EU story, yet you can bring it right down to the local level, and that's actually, in my view, much more engaging than telling the political story. You go right down to the bottom of the food chain and focus on that, because he's the guy that's relevant to the majority of your viewers at home. It's not the politician or the MEP, it's not even the scientist, though he will appeal to a certain cohort of your audience. It's to the guy on the ground within the community. So story sourcing varies. Twitter is great. There's a story, I don't know, this will kind of give you a good idea if I have it. It's a short one. Do we have time to show it
We
now?
do, yeah, we're fine, yeah.
Yeah, it's there. Okay, this story, it's about a yacht that washed ashore in West Kerry, I think it was last year. I came across the story on Twitter. A woman from that area posted a picture that was retweeted by someone that came up on my timeline. It said, "This just washed in this evening. It looks like a yacht. Nobody knows where it's come from." But I zoomed in and you could make out a name on the yacht. So I started Googling the name of the yacht. The yacht, it turned out, a yacht of a similar name had been abandoned by a sailor during a race off Canada 6 months previously. So I double checked it, got images, the colours matched, it was the boat. So straight away there's a story, because it's after drifting across the Atlantic and it washes in a Kerry beach 6 months later. There's human interest in that story. So I contacted the Canadian Coast Guard. There was a rescue, because I saw a report from a local Canadian paper online that mentioned a rescue. I chanced the Canadian Coast Guard, they had footage of the actual rescue 6 months previously. So I had footage from the helicopter of your man being wenched off the boat. Then, what's the natural thing? Who do you really want to talk to?
Him.
The guy in the boat. Tracked him down. He was an Italian living in Italy. Managed to get a contact for him. Did it. The Wi-Fi wasn't great where he was. I was hoping to record a Skype interview. Couldn't do that, so I said, I'll send you an email with 2 questions. Get a friend to record you